Today's episode is brought to you by Fishing Clash. Having already discussed Kramer's insights in regards to the succubus and the incubus, and how these two demons operate in both the physical and the spiritual world, we see Kramer continue to delve deeper into the roles of these devilish creatures, and whether they serve as a punishment towards the sinner for their transgressions, or whether it is just their nature to be evil. Kramer initiates chapter 4 of his Malleus Maleficarum by contemplating by which devils are the operations of the incubus and the succubus practiced, or to put it simply, which demons behave like the incubus and succubus by preying on mankind. But before diving into the specific demons that Kramer mentions, a message from today's sponsor, Fishing Clash. Fishing Clash is a free-to-play game on Android and iOS, where you can catch fish to your heart's content. There's over 100 different species of fish for you to catch, from the black sea bass, the yellowtail snapper, or the more exotic dolphin fish. Using various lures and rods, Fishing Clash allows you to explore the oceans and catch all kinds of exotic sea life, and by upgrading your equipment, you can gain access to even bigger fish. You can also journey to different locations from around the world in search of more diverse and tropical fish. All you have to do is cast your line with the press of a button and rapidly tap the reel to bring in a hooked fish. My favourite part of Fishing Clash is going head to head with other players in weekly PvP events that see hunters battling it out to secure the biggest and rarest types of aquatic creatures that the game has to offer. If you'd like to join in the fun of Fishing Clash, then click the link in the description box below and use my code FISHWITHLEGENDS, where new players can earn a special reward worth $20, including a 3-star rod to get more bonuses, the Florida Pro license to increase your speed, catch, and overall points, 50 lucky power-ups to aid in getting the fish you want, and 30 weight power-ups to help you catch bigger fish. To redeem this offer, just follow these 3 simple steps. And now back to the Malleus Maleficarum. Kramer first ponders on the idea as to whether it is Catholic to believe that other demons have the same function as the incubi and the succubi, and whether all unclean spirits prey on mankind. He ultimately decides here that it is indeed Catholic to think of the demons in this way, and that they all, regardless of their rank or characteristics, do have bad intentions. It is unclear whether Kramer believes that all demons prey on humans sexually, as the incubus and succubus do, but he does decide that they mean to harm mankind, and will do so in any way they can conceive. He declares that to think otherwise is to assume that there can be goodness amongst the demons, which according to Kramer cannot possibly be the case. On top of this, he tells us that the side of the demons is rife with disorder, as it is the antithesis of the side of the angels, which is defined by order. In this disorder, the notion of evil becomes a confusing concept to really grasp, even for the demons. And so every demon indulges in their chaotic nature and blindly follows the practice of quarrying mankind. In this, they are more animalistic in their desire to hurt man, but unlike animals, they do this maliciously, rather than as a need for nourishment or for self-protection. In fact, with this idea, they are seen much less as serving Satan or one big bad evil essence, but instead fulfilling their own primary function, which is to cause suffering. Much more, unlike animals, the demons possess an intellectual cunning that allows them to bombard humanity psychologically, spiritually, and sometimes even in the corporeal sense, as is seen to happen to Job. Speaking of Job, Kramer uses Job's experience as an example here of what the side of the demons is like, or at least the space in which they dwell, and a space they wish to push humanity if they get the chance. He quotes from chapter 10 of the book of Job, "A land of darkness, as darkness itself, and of the shadow of death, without any order, and where the light is as darkness." Of course, as is his style, Kramer considers alternatives for his idea that demons are all inherently wicked because of their nature. He suggests that there could be a case for demons being wicked, because indeed, whilst God had designed them that way, they serve the purpose of punishing sinners. In this, they are only wicked towards those who have transgressed against their God, and like in Job's case, they are only permitted to attack those who God has marked. Of course, in Job's case, Job didn't actually sin, but this might explain why innocent people suffer too, or why demons do have free range over humanity and the earthly world. Kramer also continues that the type of demon one may become afflicted by is dependent on the size of their sin. For example, if one was to commit a terribly sacrilegious deed, then they would be more likely to attract a more harmful spirit, one who was sent to punish the guilty party. Yet of the demons, Kramer tells us that they too will be cast into hell after the day of judgment, perhaps an indication that they are punishers of sin, as after the day of judgment they no longer have a purpose, and thus are discarded. Here their nature makes them damnable, and unlike us, they have no choice but to reside in hell in the end times. Of course, as demons, they probably wouldn't mind this reality, for they would then have an untold amount of souls to torture for eternity, the souls of those who were denied entrance to heaven. Kramer then proceeds to talk about the hierarchy of the demons, though there are some contradictions. If the demons are chaotic in nature and represent disorder, it is unlikely that they would have a hierarchy at all, for that would require some semblance of structure. Yet Kramer puts forward an idea based on a passage from Corinthians 15, where he quotes, "As long as the world endures, angels are set over angels, men over men, and demons over demons." With this idea, he seeks to provide an alternative concept, that the demons follow a similar formation as both the angels and humanity. Presumably, Kramer puts forth that angels serve the archangels, men serve kings, and thus demons must serve greater demons, or one chief demon or body, potentially a character like Satan. Kramer proceeds to also draw inspiration from chapter 11 of Job, where Job encounters Leviathan, stating that the scales of the beast signify the members of the devil, and how each scale or demon cleaves to one another. Kramer then moves on to the idea of potential altercations between angels and demons, and whether angels can actually restrain demons from causing harm. Put simply, it is believed that they can. However, it is only the angels who are closest to God, perhaps the cherubim, the seraphim, or the archangels themselves, who possess such ability. This isn't to say that regular angels cannot overcome demons, but more so that they have not been given permission by God to intervene, and so do not. But those closest to God are more likely to know his intentions, and so it's reasonable to believe that God directs these angels to intervene with demonic affairs if they are becoming too nefarious. Kramer tells us specifically, the good angels, who are nearest to God, on account of their fruition in him, which the devils lack, have preference over the devils, and rule over them. He continues to tell us that when demons work without being monitored by the divine essences, those being the angels or God, then the demons can and will work egregiously, and can put man in severe danger. Rather audaciously, Kramer makes the claim that this is the fault of the angels, and that when man suffers at the hands of demons, it's actually due to the negligence of the good spirits, or the angels. Yet when he addresses this negligence, he provides an ambiguous answer, similarly to the answer that God gives Job as to the reason for his suffering, which is basically that man cannot understand divine wisdom. Ergo, man can no more understand why the angels are negligent than he can understand God's divine plan. Kramer adds that evil can indeed be done by the angels, and that much as we drop the ball when it comes to being righteous, angels can demonstrate similar behaviour by not intervening when necessary. Kramer continues his ideas about hierarchy amongst the demons, and that certain roles are reserved for certain demons, which again contradicts the idea that demons and their nature is entirely chaotic. As certain demons have roles, for example, the lowest of demons committing to abominations, it would suggest that these roles were assigned, again probably by a chief demon, or Satan. The same would then apply to the angels, who, based on their rank within the hierarchy, perform more nobler tasks than others. There's also an idea he touches upon that no two angels are alike in form, and that some are more likely to sin and, in effect, join the side of the demons than others. This is true during the fall, when Lucifer and the angels who fell were banished from heaven and forced to live on earth with mankind, those who they hated. Kramer adds that these angels, despite their evilness, did not lose their natural gifts, and it could be suggested that the rulers of the demons are these very angels, bad angels, if you will, for they are the only ones powerful enough to provide some structure for the evil spirits. Kramer then turns his attention to the eternal war between mankind and the demons, and continues with yet another contradiction. Having already established demons as chaotic and disorderly, he goes on to declare that demons were deputized by God for the temptation of men, and serve God by punishing those who have sinned. In this, I suppose you might say that their wickedness becomes harmonized with their nature. Yet Kramer continues to deviate his own ideas by suggesting that demons do fight in an orderly manner, despite having maintained that they are beings of chaos, and that they are so much smarter than man, thus making them potent adversaries. Regardless of a demon's rank, however, whether they be chief demon or lower underling, Kramer concludes that they all share the same hatred for mankind, and every demon is an abomination. Kramer then turns his focus to the names of the demons, and tells us that each demon's name is more than just a means to identify them, but also to establish where they sit in terms of their hierarchy, as well as which office is assigned to each. Interestingly, he makes a point that in scripture, the Bible does not make the delineation between demons and the devil, and that each individual demon's efforts are amalgamated into one singular being, Satan. He then concludes this chapter with a description of several demons, starting with the unclean spirit known as Diabolus. He considers the etymology of the name, dia, meaning two, and bolus, meaning morsel, which Kramer interprets as representing two things, the body and the soul. With this, he makes a bit of a stretch by assuming that Diabolus is a killer of the soul and the body. Where he derives this from isn't clear, and he goes on to deviate by making note of the Greek etymology for Diabolus, which is to mean prison. Diabolus can also mean, according to Kramer, downflowing, suggesting that this spirit flowed down, that is, fell from heaven. He goes on to tell us that the name of Diabolus can mean cunning over blood, since this entity thirsts for power over man. Diabolus is also mistaken for the entity Belial, as Kramer tells us means he who is without a master, and that he can fight against man or spirit that tries to preside over him. He can also be called Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, and that these flies are actually the souls of the sinners who have abandoned their faith. Then of course there's also Diabolus' association with Satan, that is to mean the adversary, and perhaps the ultimate adversary. Kramer also tells us that Diabolus can be mistaken for Behemoth, as seen by Job, because Diabolus, or Behemoth, can make men bestial. But despite the focus on Diabolus, Kramer makes note of another demon that is perhaps far more potent, for he is the spirit that presides over fornication and the chief corrupter of man's sexual nature. Kramer tells us, but the very detail of fornication and the chief of that abomination is called Asmodeus, which means the creature of judgment. For because of this kind of sin, a terrible judgment was executed upon Sodom and the 4 other cities. Now, some of you would know of Asmodeus as a demon of lust, but interestingly, Kramer associates him with the sin committed at Sodom and Gomorrah, and in some capacity marks him as responsible for the act of sodomy. Despite the Bible making no reference to Asmodeus at Sodom, Kramer gets the idea that Asmodeus was the one who tempted man into provocation and sexual indulgence, though he does not provide his reasoning as to why he believes this. He then goes on to talk about Leviathan, telling us that this is a demon of pride. He also notes that the name Leviathan means their addition, and that because when Lucifer tempted Adam and Eve, he promised them, out of his pride, the addition of divinity. In this, it's almost as if Kramer tries to synchronize Lucifer and Leviathan, but yet again, his reasoning for this is not explained. Finally, he makes note of Mammon, the demon of greed and money, but he does not say much else about this character, other than that he was acknowledged by Jesus, and thus was something of a notable threat to man, given how highly man regards his wealth. To conclude, Kramer seeks to consolidate his knowledge in 5 points, those that of course continue to contradict each other. Firstly, he tells us that good can be found without evil, but evil cannot be found without good, for evil is poured upon a creature that is good in itself. So in essence, after all this talk about nature, preconceived behaviours, and divinely designed demons that know only chaos, he seems to abandon the idea completely and decide that every creature is good to begin with, and that it becomes evil through its environment and external influences. He notes here that the demons did once have good nature, but suddenly their nature changes, and thus they become evil, perhaps as decided by God or decided by themselves. Instead of elaborating, Kramer tells us to seek the answers in the Book of Job, which in my opinion is a bit of a cop-out on his behalf. The second of the 5 points tells us that the devils who do work evils against man are not necessarily in hell, but instead are in the mortal realm, in the lower mists, hiding in the confines of Earth's darkest corners. It is in these crevices that they have order amongst themselves, an order that cannot be achieved in hell. He continues to tell us of hell, and it may be said that even in hell, there will be among them a gradation of power and of the affiliations of punishments, inasmuch as some and not others will be deputed to torment the souls. But this gradation will come rather from God than from themselves, as will also their torments. In this, he tells us that the demons will torture the souls of mankind in hell, but that they are commissioned by God to do this. God is in complete control of hell by this logic, and he decides exactly which demons do the tormenting, as well as to what magnitude a person should suffer. The third of the 5 points tell us that the high-ranking demons will receive a most devastating punishment in the end times, because they have sinned the most, which you might say doesn't really make much sense, given his previous point that God is the one who commissions the demons to do all these nasty things in the first place. The fourth of the 5 points sees Kramer tell us that there is an agreement among devils, but that this is formed from wickedness and a mutual hatred of man, rather than any actual notion of friendship. In this, it might be said that the demons don't particularly like each other, but tolerate one another and maybe even exploit each other in their own individual efforts to harm mankind. Lastly, in the fifth and final point, Kramer highlights the point that the more potent demons will suffer more than others for their transgressions against mankind. He tells us, the more potent in office, the heavier is their torment, to which they are subjected. This might also apply to mankind, in that the more wicked a person is, the more likely it is that they will experience much more severe suffering in the afterlife. Kramer leaves us with a quote, "The powerful shall powerfully suffer torments." This is perhaps one of the most difficult chapters we've covered on the Malleus Maleficarum, and whilst the nature of the subject can often be confounding, Kramer's erratic thoughts do make it quite difficult to digest. At several points throughout the book, we see him jump from point to point in an effort to ambiguously cement his belief system, one that isn't necessarily typical of Catholic doctrine. His bold claims about demons, incubi, succubi, and the greater divinities and celestials is not something that can be corroborated by the Bible itself, and when he isn't cherry-picking, and quite honestly warping biblical quotes to serve his opinions, he chooses obscure philosophers to reinforce ideas that are, for the lack of a better term, quite mad. It's not such a stretch to say that Kramer was unhinged. Even in his own time period, he was said to have been quite obsessed with the hunting and persecution of witches, especially after he had failed to convict a group of witches and was deemed insane by the courts. With Kramer's almost giddy writing style, you can almost see him becoming unravelled as he skips from argument to argument without much substance to support some of his claims. Whilst his ideas are certainly fascinating, and whilst we do get an interesting perspective into the mind of a potentially deluded fanatic, it should be noted that his writings were said to have been consulted, albeit in an unofficial capacity, by the Inquisition, who would hunt witches and torture them until confession. Whether you deem Kramer's hammer of witches to be ambivalent claptrap or religious rigmarole, it was his sentiments that fueled the fires of several witchcraft trials in the 15th century, and saw thousands of women tortured and executed, even decades after Kramer's own death. But let me know what your thoughts were on today's instalment of the Malleus Maleficarum. Are there any notions about Kramer's writings that resonated with or interested you? Or do you think his ideas were just fanciful gibberish and the thoughts and feelings of a madman? As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.